400 tons every single day. That is the number that changed everything for Burkina Faso. 400 tons of locally grown rice, cleaned, sorted, graded, and packaged inside a single facility in the Burkinabe city of Kamsila. Using technology so advanced it sorts individual grains at 64 million megapixels of optical precision. This factory is not supposed to exist. Not here. Not in a landlocked Sahelian nation that the Western world has spent decades classifying as one of the poorest and most food-insecure countries on Earth. Not in a country that was importing 700,000 metric tons of Asian rice every single year just a few seasons ago. And yet the machines are running. The conveyor belts are moving. The bags are being filled. And some of the rice sitting in African supermarkets right now came out of this factory. The story of how this happened, how a desert nation built one of the top 10 largest rice processing facilities on the entire African continent, is the story of what happens when a government stops accepting the limits it has been given and starts engineering its own future. Welcome. This is Arizin Now. To understand why this factory matters so deeply, you need to understand the trap it was built to escape. Rice is not native to Burkina Faso. The country's traditional staple crops are sorghum, millet, and maize, drought-resistant grains that have fed Sahelian communities for thousands of years. But colonialism rewired the food preferences of an entire continent. European administrators introduced processed white rice as a prestige food during the colonial era. Over generations, urban Burkinabe populations developed strong preferences for it. And because nobody was investing in local rice production infrastructure, that preference was fed almost entirely by imports. By the time Traoré took power in 2022, the numbers were staggering. Burkina Faso was importing 70% of its rice consumption, nearly 700,000 metric tons per year arriving from Vietnam, Thailand, and other Asian producers. The cost was enormous, not just financially but strategically. A nation that cannot feed itself with its own grain is a nation that can be held hostage by international shipping prices, foreign harvest failures, or simple political decisions made in capitals thousands of kilometers away. During the COVID-19 disruptions of 2020 and 2021, global rice supply chains tightened sharply. Prices spiked. Countries that produced their own rice insulated themselves. Countries that imported it, like Burkina Faso, absorbed the full shock. Traoré watched this and drew a conclusion that would define his entire agricultural policy. Food dependency is a national security threat. You cannot win a war on borrowed rice. But here is the insight that separates Traoré's approach from every failed African agricultural initiative that came before it. He understood that a factory without rice to process is just an expensive building. So before he built the factory at full scale, he built the fields. The Agro-Pastoral and Fisheries Offensive, a nearly $1 billion initiative funded from nationalized gold revenues, began by attacking the production side of the problem with overwhelming force. 400 tractors handed to farmers, free. 239 power tillers, free. Over 700 water pumps, free. 69,000 tons of fertilizer distributed across the country. 18,000 tons of improved hybrid rice seeds delivered directly to farming communities. And critically, the irrigation infrastructure to make it all work year-round. The Duro perimeter, powered by a solar pumping station delivering 9,720 cubic meters of water per hour. The Bagre growth pole, sitting on a 1.7 billion cubic meter reservoir, using satellite monitoring and IoT sensors to optimize every drop of irrigation water. The DA perimeter in the Nord region, using Archimedean screw pumps to lift water from the Serba River into a gravity-fed canal network that transformed 2,240 hectares of arid land into neon green rice paddies at the edge of the Sahara. In Banzassan, modern irrigation is now pulling 6 tons of rice per hectare. Local farmers are testifying on camera about harvests reaching 5 tons per hectare, production levels that would have seemed like fantasy just a few years ago. And because the irrigation systems allow for year-round water delivery, farmers are no longer waiting for the rainy season. They are harvesting rice and maize twice a year, effectively doubling the agricultural calendar. By 2024, the total cereal production of Burkina Faso crossed 6 million tons, more than enough for the entire domestic population. That is when the factory became the critical next step. Because producing 6 million tons of grain and then watching it rot or selling it as cheap raw commodity to be processed somewhere else would be to repeat exactly the colonial pattern that kept the country poor for 60 years. Harvest is step 1. Processing is sovereignty. Walk inside the Kamsila rice processing facility And what you see defies everything the outside world thinks it knows about Burkina Faso. This is not a rustic grain warehouse. This is not a simple husking mill. This is an industrial processing operation running at 400 tons of rice per day, ranked among the top 10 largest rice processing facilities on the entire African continent. The centerpiece of the facility is its optical sorting technology. These are not ordinary machines. The optical sorters installed here operate at 64 million megapixels of sorting capacity. 64 million. That means every single grain of rice passing through this system is being individually analyzed at a resolution that the human eye could never match. Impurities, broken grains, discolored kernels, foreign particles are identified and removed with a precision that produces a final product competitive with the highest quality rice available anywhere in the world. When Traoré personally inaugurated the facility, he stood in front of these machines and explained the vision directly. He said, "These optical sorters are equipped with 64 million megapixels of capacity to sort out impurities and calibrate the rice to make it very clean and produce a high-quality product." So the national rice is competitive both nationally and internationally. National rice. Competitive internationally. That phrase carries the entire weight of the revolution. This is not rice being processed for local consumption, because there is no better option. This is rice being processed to a standard that can compete on the global market. Beyond the optical sorters, the facility runs ultra-modern conveyor systems moving grain from intake to cleaning to sorting to packaging in a continuous high-volume flow. The output, branded bags of Burkina rice, neatly sealed and ready for supermarket shelves. Not raw patty sold cheaply to a foreign processor. Not bulk grain loaded onto trucks, heading to a port. Finished product, branded, packaged. Burkina, the rice factory is only half of the processing revolution. Because while Kamsala was being scaled up for rice, something equally dramatic was happening with wheat. For decades, Western agronomists told African governments that growing wheat in the Sahel was climatically impossible. The temperatures were too high, the rainfall too unpredictable, the soil chemistry too different from the wheat belts of Europe and North America. This expert advice conveniently forced Burkina Faso to spend $75 million every single year importing 193,000 tons of wheat, mostly from France and Poland. Traoré decided to test the theory himself. He launched a domestic wheat experiment in 2023 with just 125 hectares. 125 hectares against generations of expert consensus. The experiment worked perfectly. By the 2024 season, the government aggressively scaled the program to 1,342 hectares, yielding nearly 2,600 tons of domestic wheat straight from Burkina soil. Golden wheat fields, swaying in the Burkina wind, in a country that was told it could not grow wheat. And to process that wheat, the Minofa factory was transformed. Under Traoré's mandate, Minofa tripled its annual production capacity from 9,000 tons to 32,000 tons today. It now runs a 150-ton daily capacity and is preparing to expand further. Wheat grown in Burkina Faso, milled in Burkina Faso, into flour that feeds Burkina Faso. The $75 million per year that used to flow to French and Polish exporters is beginning to stay home. Consider tomatoes. Burkina Faso produces over 300,000 tons of fresh tomatoes annually. 300,000 tons. For generations, this was one of the most tragic statistics in Burkina agriculture. Farmers grew enormous quantities of tomatoes. But without processing infrastructure, those tomatoes simply rotted by the roadside, in the fields, on the trucks that couldn't reach a market in time. Meanwhile, Burkina Faso was spending fortunes importing canned tomato paste from Europe and China. Importing paste. While 300,000 tons of fresh tomatoes rotted domestically, Traoré crushed that cycle. The government backed massive processing plants, including the SOB facility inaugurated in November 20. It processes 6 tons of fresh tomatoes per hour, nearly 100 tons per day, 100% owned by the Burkina people, funded locally and by the diaspora. An investment of approximately 8 billion CFA francs. On the conveyor belts inside, endless streams of red Sahelian-grown tomatoes move through crushing, cooking, concentrating, and canning lines under the brand Adi, produced by local workers for local and international markets. Traoré himself touched the cans at the inauguration. He picked them up, turned them over, looked at the label. This is almost never seen. A head of state handling finished products at a factory inauguration with that level of personal engagement. But it reflects his core philosophy. The raw materials and the factories must belong to the same people. The farmer who grew the tomato and the worker who canned it should both be Burkinabe. The value should stay in the same country where the seed was planted. The same logic extends to Burkina Faso's most valuable export crops: cashews, shea, mangoes. Burkina Faso is a significant global cashew producer, typically ranking in the top 10 worldwide and top 5 in Africa for raw cashew nut production. But historically, nearly all of those cashews left the country as raw, unprocessed nuts. The processing, the roasting, the shelling, the grading, the packaging happened in factories in Vietnam, India, and Europe. The value addition happened abroad. Burkina Faso got the price of a raw commodity. Everyone else got the price of a finished product. In 2024, the government banned the export of raw shea nuts, forcing the value addition to happen domestically. In 2025, the $11.5 million SN Anatrans factory in Bobo Dioulasso began processing 5,000 tons of cashew apples annually into concentrate, juice, wine, vinegar, and ethanol. Over 90% of the workforce women. In the Kédougou province, the state renewed 500 hectares of land specifically for mango cultivation and distributed 400,000 elite mango saplings to farmers entirely free of charge. Workers strapped bundles of young trees to motorcycles to deliver them deep into rural areas where no logistics company would go. And the shea butter story has an international dimension that most people do not know. Massive trucks are now exporting processed liquefied shea butter from Burkina Faso to the international market. Some of the nut and shea products sitting in European and American cosmetics and food products right now were processed inside Burkina Faso. The country the world wrote off as an import-dependent food crisis is becoming an export-capable processing economy. Everything we have just walked through, the rice fields, the optical sorting machines, the wheat campaign, the tomato plants, the cashew factories, all of it converged into a single announcement that landed in April 2026, like a thunderclap. Burkina Faso halted all rice imports from abroad, completely, not reduced, not regulated, not subject to new tariffs, halted. The government made the move explicitly to prioritize local farmers, a decision that signals not just how much production they have secured, but how confident they are in sustaining it. Think about the journey embedded in that announcement. A country that was importing 70% of its rice, 700,000 metric tons per year from Asia, is now producing enough domestically that it no longer needs a single grain from abroad. The rice perimeters are producing, the factories are processing, the branded bags are on the shelves. The 40-year dependency cycle broke in less than 3 years, and it broke not because of foreign aid, not because of an IMF structural transformation program, not because of a World Bank agricultural development grant. It broke because a government redirected its own gold revenues into its own farmers' hands, built its own irrigation infrastructure, installed its own optical sorting machines, and refused to accept that the country had to remain a raw commodity exporter forever. Step back from the conveyor belts for a moment. Step back from the optical sorters and the branded packaging lines and the 400 tons per day capacity, and ask a different question. What is this factory really? It is easy to describe it in industrial terms: inputs, outputs, daily capacity, ranking among African facilities. But that misses the deeper reality of what is happening inside those walls. Every grain of rice that enters the Kamsila facility was grown by a Burkinabe farmer on Burkinabe soil, using water from Burkinabe irrigation systems and seeds supplied by the Burkinabe state. Every worker operating the sorting machines, the conveyor belts, the packaging lines, is a Burkinabe citizen earning a Burkinabe salary that gets spent in Burkinabe markets. Every bag of finished rice that leaves the facility carries a Burkinabe brand onto shelves that were previously stocked with Asian imports. And every franc that would have left this country as payment for imported rice is now circulating domestically through farmer incomes, factory wages, transport contracts, packaging suppliers. This factory is not just processing rice. It is processing sovereignty. It is the physical proof that the colonial arrangement, extract raw materials, import finished goods, remain permanently dependent, is not a law of nature. It is a choice. And Burkina Faso has made a different choice. The secret behind Ibrahim Traore's mega rice factory is not the optical sorting technology. It is not the 400-ton daily capacity. It is not even the nationalized gold revenues that funded the irrigation systems that made the rice fields possible. The secret is a philosophy. A philosophy that says, if a grain of rice is grown here, it must also be cleaned here, sorted here, packaged here, sold here, and the profit must stay here. Every stage of production from the dirt to the package must remain under sovereign control. That sentence spoken by Traoré at a factory inauguration is the entire blueprint. From the dirt to the package. Not from the dirt to a foreign shipping container. Not from the dirt to a processing facility in another country. From the dirt, Burkina Bay dirt, to the package Burkina Bay branded, in a Burkina Bay factory, by Burkina Bay workers, sold to Burkina Bay consumers, and exported to international markets on Burkina Bay terms. This is why the factory that was not supposed to exist in a country the world classified as too poor and too unstable to build anything lasting is running 400 tons per day and competing internationally. Because the secret was never about technology or capital. The secret was always about who controls the chain. For 60 years, the chain was controlled from outside. The seeds came from abroad. The processing happened abroad. The profits went abroad. All that changed was a decision. A decision made by a young captain in a red beret who stood in front of optical sorting machines and said, "This rice is ours. The factory is ours. The profit is ours." And then he made it true. In April 2026, Burkina Faso stopped importing rice entirely. The machines are still running, 400 tons per day, every single day. This is arisen now. But here is what the story of the rice factory reveals about something much larger. Burkina Faso is not building these factories in isolation. They are building them as proof of concept for an entire continent. Mali is watching. Niger is watching. Guinea is watching. Every nation in the Alliance of Sahel states is studying what Burkina Faso has done with its rice processing capacity, its wheat milling expansion, its tomato canning plants, and its cashew processing facilities, because the model is replicable. Every Sahelian nation has agricultural land that is underutilized. Every Sahelian nation has mineral wealth that is being extracted by foreign companies under terms that leave the population poor. Every Sahelian nation has farmers who are selling raw commodities at the bottom of the global value chain, while foreign processors capture all the margin. The Kamsala rice factory is not just a factory. It is a demonstration. It is Traoré standing in front of the African continent and saying, "Look, we grew the rice, we built the factory, we installed the machines, we packaged the product, we stopped the imports. If we can do this in 3 years, starting from a country where 70% of rice was imported, what can you do?" Pan-African economists and development analysts who previously argued that African food processing at scale required foreign capital, foreign technology, and foreign expertise are now being forced to revise that position because Burkina Faso just disproved it. Not with a theory, not with a policy paper, with 400 tons of locally processed rice per day, and the wheat factory tripled its capacity, and the tomato plant is running at 100 tons per day. And the cashew facility is processing 5,000 tons of fruit per year, with a workforce that is 90% women. And across 61 localities, 50,000 homes are being built for the poor. And a 35-story skyscraper is rising in the capital. And a billion-dollar canal is being designed to connect the great reservoirs and irrigate millions more hectares. One factory, 400 tons per day. That is where it started. That is the secret. And the blueprint is now being read across the entire continent. This is arisen now.